we're in Shir. We are in Shir Dalid in Hilchot, what we're going to call Tosefet Shabbat, Kabbalat Shabbat. So Tosefet Shabbat. The word Tosefet means extra, adding on to Shabbat. Many of us are very familiar with Tosefet Shabbat during the spring and the summer months. In the spring and the summer, we know Shabbat starts late, and no one really wants to eat dinner at 9:30. So we take in Shabbat early. And so they were very familiar with Tosefet Shabbat in the spring and the summer. But the truth is, Tosefet Shabbat, we're going to see, is an always event. It's something that we're supposed to be doing. Something we're supposed to be doing in the spring, summer, winter, and the fall. Adding on to the Kedusha of Shabbat. What is the source of Tosefet Shabbat? We'll take a look at page 145, Mesechah Rosh Hashanah. This is also a Gemara in Mesechet Yomah. And it says over there, V'initem et nafshotechem b'tish'ah. There's a pasuk that tells us that on Yom Kippur, you have to afflict your souls. And it says b'tish'ah. So the Gemara asks, b'tish'ah, I thought Yom Kippur is on the 10th of the month, not on the 9th of the month. So Talmud Lomar be'erev. It says be'erev, in the evening. That means after the 9th day in the evening. If it meant just the evening, I would think when it got dark. Talmud Lomar be'tish'ah. So why does it say tish'ah? HaKetzad matchil mit'aneh mib'od yom. Milamed shemosvin mechol al kodesh. The fact that it says in Vayikra, it says that Yom Kippur is Betisha on the 9th, Me'erev ad Erev, it teaches us that it starts a few minutes before the 10th of Tishrei. That's why the mitzvah is Yom Kippur, you're supposed to take in a few minutes beforehand. This is the lesson of Tosefet, of adding on to Yom Kippur. Now, the Gemara says, I only know about going into Yom Kippur. I have to add a few extra minutes. How do I know about after? How do I know? Talmud Lomar me'erev ad erev. From the 9th evening till the 10th evening. That means in the 9th evening, you start a few minutes before. And on the 10th evening after Yom Kippur, we don't just right away, the fast ends and we're done. We add a few minutes to the fast. Tosefet of the Kiddusham. Now the Gemara says, the real clincher. I only know Yom Kippur. Shabbatot menayan. What about Shabbat? How do I know Shabbat that I also have to add on to Shabbat? Talmud Lomar Tishbetu. The pasuk there says the word Tishbetu. That pasuk is coming to tell us about Shabbat. Yamim Tovim. What about Yom Tovim? How do I know I have to add on to Yom Tov? Talmud Lomar Shabbatechem. It says the word Shabbatechem. HaKetzad. Kol makom sheyesh bo shivut. Anywhere you have to stop doing melacham, mosefin mechol al kodesh. We add on from the weekday to the special holiday or the Shabbat. This is the source in the Talmud, based on the pasuk in the Torah, that we have to add on to Shabbat, Yom Tov, and Yom Kippur. It comes from Yom Kippur, and the Gemara says it expands to Shabbat and Yom Tov. Okay? Now, I heard an interesting idea in this, is that Kedusha is so powerful, right? The holiness is so powerful. Just like when you had the Beit HaMikdash, you had the Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash, but Yerushalayim, even though it's outside the Beit HaMikdash, the Beit HaMikdash is one place, and Yerushalayim is the rest of the city. However, the Kedusha of Yerushalayim is greater than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because the Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash spreads out into Jerusalem. It's the same thing with time. When you have a time that's very holy, holiness can't be constrained. Holiness always needs to expand. And so there's a Shabbat, there's a time of holiness on Shabbat. Well, guess what? It can't stay in just that time. It has to expand to before and after. Now, which days does the mitzvah of Tosefet apply to? We saw the Gemara. The Gemara said Yom Kippur. That's what we learned it from. Shabbat and Yom Tov. However, interesting to note, the Rambam, when he brings down the halachot of Tosefet, he only says it about Yom Kippur. The Rambam does not say it about Shabbat. The Rambam does not say about Yom Tovim. The Rambam says the only time you have to add on to the day of the holiness is Yom Kippur.
You have a problem. He says,
so he says that's right, and he uses like the other Amoraim in the Gemara that say that the other words in the pasuk tell us that eating on the 9th day is like fasting on the 10th day. Okay, and this is what the Beit Yosef says. The Beit Yosef in source number 3 on page 146 says that Rambam holds that there's only Tosefet on Yom Kippur because he learns that the other words of Tishbetu, Shabbat, Echem is used for other drashot, and they're not used to tell us that Shabbat and Yom Tov also has to be added on. The Beit Yosef, so Rav Yosef Karo, continues in source number 4, and he says, there's a bigger chiddush, the Tur, another halachic work. The Tur doesn't say anything about adding on to Shabbat. Just like the Rambam, just the Tur also doesn't say, but interesting to note, the Tur's father, the Rosh, does say it. So the Beit Yosef is, why does the Rosh say it and the son, the Tur, doesn't say it? However, the Rif and the Rosh do bring it down. And they do say that you have to add on to Shabbat. And the halachic approach is that adding on to Shabbat is a biblical mitzvah. It's a deoraita. That a person is supposed to add on to Shabbat is deoraita. Okay, now exactly how when you have to add on, what's considered add on, we'll go through the details. But the idea of adding on to Shabbat, according to the Rif and according to the Rosh, it's deoraita. And in the Bir Halacha, right, the Chavetz Chaim here says that, you know what? The Rambam also holds a Tosefet Shabbat. The only reason why he doesn't mention it, because he doesn't hold his deoraita. He holds the Rabbanan. That's what the Bir Halacha here wants to say. And he says the fact that the Rambam brings that there were shofar blasts, right? That they would blow certain shofar 6 times before Shabbat, they would blow it. And at certain points, you would do certain things. Lichvot Shabbat Kodesh. So you see, says the Bir Halacha, that the Rambam held of a Tosefet Shabbat. He just didn't hold it was the Oraita. Now take a look at the Shulchan Aruch in source number 7 on page 148. The Shulchan Aruch says, Yesh Omrim Shetzarich Lohosif Mechol Ala Kodesh. That you have to add on from the Friday, you have to add on minutes to Shabbat. Why does it say Yesh? So there are those who want to say that the Shulchan Aruch says Yesh in honor of the Rambam, since the Rav Yosef Karo held that the Rambam doesn't talk about Tosefet Shabbat at all. So the Shulchan Aruch, who does hold of it, says Yesh Omrim. And the Magen Avraham says, and see Beferish right here, Shetzarich Lohosif Vaveh Mitzvot Aseh Medoraita, says the Magen Avraham. It is a Mitzvot Aseh Deoraita to add on time to Shabbat.
Oh, where it said?
From that pasuk.
The whole is drashot.
So that drasha is Deoraita. That's what he's saying. That's the way we're learning it. And the Shulchan Aruch, in another source, when it talks about the end of Shabbat, that you have to add on to the end of Shabbat, there it doesn't use the lashon of yesh. Ma'achirin tfilat arvit kedei lohosif mechol ala kodesh. Doesn't say yesh. There are those who say add on time and stop and tfilat arvit late. No, he says that's what we do. We add on mechol al kodesh at the end. So the Shulchan Aruch, right? And we'll say Shabbat. So the Shulchan Aruch is quite clear that a person has to add on time mechol al kodesh from the weekday to the kodesh. Just to look for a moment outside in the laws of Shabbat, a great source to have with you, the laws of Shabbat, Rabbi Yonatan Nakson, on the page 103. He writes over here in Halacha 9 and 10, Tosefet Shabbat is the mitzvah to accept Shabbat earlier than it actually begins. How much you have to do, we'll see it further, but here he says even just a few minutes before Shkia, right? This is to be a few more minutes before Shkia. No, before
No, no.
Shkia. And that's part of the idea why the calendars are 18 minutes
18
before.
is already built in.
Right. That's the idea. To accept Shabbat at the candle lighting time, that gives you accepting Shabbat early. Who is obligated in it here, he says? Both men and women are obligated in the mitzvah of Tosefet Shabbat. And here again, he writes on the bottom over here that many poskim hold Tosefet Shabbat is a mitzvah deoraita. So the majority of poskim say adding on is to Shabbat is a mitzvah deoraita. Okay, now that we know this, what does it mean Tosefet Shabbat? There's two ideas of how you see adding on to Shabbat. Is adding on to Shabbat a change in the day? Meaning it's Friday, it's still sunlight. I accepted Shabbat. I've now made a reality change, and it's no longer Friday, even though it's daylight, and I've made a Shabbat a real Shabbat. Or does Tosefet Shabbat mean I've taken on the laws of Shabbat, but it's not actually Shabbat? Meaning I can't do melachot, I can't do work, but it's not really Shabbat yet. When we have this mitzvah of adding on to Shabbat, what does that time that I added on, what is that status? Is it really Shabbat? Or is it not really Shabbat, but I am acting as if it is Shabbat? Right? What is the nafkamina? Biggest nafkamina is, can I eat my Sudat Shabbat? Is it Shabbat? Right? You can see there's a pasuk that says you have to eat Shabbat Sudat on Shabbat. Right? So if I'm eating before the time of Shabbat, but it's my Shabbat, am I really eating on Shabbat or not? We're going to go through this right now. So look at this. Mishnah Psachim, source number 10. Erev Psachim, Samach L'Mincha, V'yechol Adam Asher Techshach. When it comes to Pesach, you can't eat already half hour before Mincha until it gets dark, right? You want to have a good appetite for the matzah. That's also part of Hiddur Mitzvah. Sometimes the way to do a Hiddur Mitzvah is to buy something fancy. Sometimes the way to do a Hiddur Mitzvah is to abstain from something, so when you get to that mitzvah, you're excited about it, right? Stay away from the matzah. So you have this din that you don't eat Erev Pesach. You wait till the nighttime. And why? So Rashi says, because it's a Hiddur Mitzvah to be hungry when you get to the matzah. Now, Tosefet asks an amazing question here. He says, why do you say until dark? It's obvious. And then he says, how come by Shabbat and Yom Tov we never say you have to wait till the dark? So he says, you know why on Pesach we have to wait till the dark? Because there's a pasuk that says, Matzotu Maror, Pesach you have to eat. When the Korban Pesach you have to eat? Belayla, in the night. And Matzah and Maror is connected to the Korban Pesach. So the mitzvot of Pesach must be by night. That's why by Pesach we have this din, you have to wait for night. But look at the bold part on source number 12 on page 149. Aval Sudat Shabbat Yom Tovim, you can eat it while it's still day. Kidda Omer Perek Tfilat HaShachar Mesachtes Brachos. Mitpal Admar Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. But Omer Kiddush Hayom Mib'od Yom. So says Tosefet that what? That you adding on time to Shabbat, you've created Shabbat. It's actually Shabbat. You can eat your meal before nightfall because it's actually Shabbat, and that it's the only reason on Pesach we say you can't do this because there's a pasuk that says you have to eat the Korban Pesach at night, matzah and mar is at night, so you have to wait for actual night. But the rest of the year, it never says tonight because when you add on to Shabbat, it's actually Shabbat. However, there's another Gemara in Masechta Ketuvot, and the Gemara in Ketuvot says there's a whole sugi that we're not going to get into, but it says over there that an idea of getting married on Shabbat or Yom Tov. But there's a problem with getting married on Shabbat or Yom Tov because what? The Gemara in Moed Katan says we can't mix simchot, right? You can't take the simcha of Yom Tov and have the simcha of Chatan v'Kala together. They have to be separated. We don't want to bundle everything together. It's not a bundle package. Get everything down two birds with one stone. Everything has to have its own time and place. Okay? So how could the Gemara there say you can have a wedding on Shabbat? So Tosefet there says, You know what it is?
1 hour before.
It's an hour before Shabbat. It's not really Shabbat. It's an hour before Shabbat, and you accepted Shabbat.
Oh, he did.
He did. That's the whole idea. So this is a steer on Tosefot. Tosefot here says an hour before Shabbat, you accepted Shabbat, but it's not really Shabbat. You can still get married. It's not mixing simachot. So, for 1 second, you just told me a moment ago that you couldn't have your Suda early because it's really Shabbat. So, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman in the Kovid Shiurim on page 150 in source 15 says there's a big problem with Tosfot. Tosfot in one place says Miv'od Yom is you accept the Shabbat, it's really Shabbat. In his other place, Tosfot saying it's not really Shabbat, and you can get married, and it's not mixing two simachot. So, which one is it? So there's this issue between the two Tosefot.
Is it that's why Birkat and Lavana we don't say on Shabbat? It's also like Simcha also, or is that the reasoning?
Is that the reasoning we don't say Birkat Lavana on Shabbat?
We shouldn't say. I mean, unless it's the last resort. I mean.
Say what? Sometimes we say if it's the last moment.
Nolad, maybe.
I don't know the reasons behind it. I believe it might be because of carrying, it might be because of simcha, it might be other reasons. But we don't mix two simachot. Now, so we have two Tosfots, and we have one Tosfot that says you accept Shabbat early, it's really Shabbat. You have one Tosfot that says you accept Shabbat early, it's not really Shabbat. So which way to go? So how do we explain Tosfot? So in footnote number 6, he has an explanation there. I don't want to get into it. I think the easiest explanation that there may be different Baalei Tosfot, right? There were different Baalei Tosfot, different authors of Tosfot, and maybe they held different shitas, and that would be the easiest way out. On the bottom, if you want to go through the notes, he does have another way out. I don't want to spend time on that right now. However, the Magen Avraham, on page 151, source 16, he writes that says the Shla b'Shem Sefer Chasidim that even if one begins meal early, one must eat a kazayit at night to fulfill the mitzvah of having 3 meals on Shabbat. And so says the Bach in the name of the Maharal of Prague. But the Tosefot and the Rosh imply that one may completely eat their meal during the daytime. And the Trumat Tedeshin says like that. And Rabbi Yerucham says like that. As long as it's after Plaga Mincha, you can eat everything. But it's good to be strict and be machmir, says the Magen Avraham. The Mishnah Brura says the same idea on page 152. He says, really, if you accept Shabbat early, it's completely Shabbat, and you can eat your Suda and everything. But there are those who disagree, and it's better to eat a kazayit after nightfall. Lama, what do we hold? What do we hold? So here in the Yalkut Yosef, in English edition, page 220, let's see what he says over here. And he says as follows. Once someone has recited Kiddush before sunset and begun his meal, he may continue eating even after dusk. So if you started Kiddush early in the day, right, after Plaga Mincha, it is recommended, however, that he eat a kibitza. So in the Yalkut Yosef, he says not just a kazayit, not 27 grams, 54 grams of bread after tzet to fulfill the mitzvah of eating a meal on Shabbat according to all poskim. So it seems like we should be concerned and eat a kibetza, or at least a kazayit of bread after nightfall. So this is very applicable in the summer, right? In the summer, we're taking Shabbat early, right?
Usually they take after the flag. The flag usually it's very close to Shabbat. Right?
Not really. Not really. In the summer, set is going to be almost 8:30, 8:40, maybe even 9 o'clock at sometimes.
They come home 7 o'clock.
So we're coming home 7. You have an early flag 6:30, right? You come at 7 and you finish your Suda by 8. So technically, your poskim will say you can eat it during the day, right? You have the Tzurba Shadeshin, you have the Rosh, you have the Tosefot, you're in Yerucham, but everyone says you should be somewhat be machmer.
Yeah.
And a person will have to eat some bread or something afterwards to eat Su'udat on Shabbat, to be machmer on that. It's very practical. This whole idea, by the way, of taking in Shabbat early, taking in Yamim Tovim early, we're going to get more into it, but I just want to mention that it's a big topic, okay? Many Achronim Many Rishonim get into it.
He's saying it's not so easy.
It's not that easy, especially for Ashkenazim.
Right.
For Sfaradim, it's much easier for the prayers. We're going to see Ashkenazim have problems with praying as well.
No, because it says on the day.
Right.
They start the day from the night.
One of the big issues is the Yom Tovim. Okay, Yom Tovim. If you go to Ashkenaz shuls, most of Ashkenaz shuls do never pray early on Yom Tov. They always wait until it's nightfall to pray out of it, and then go home after nightfall. Right, because they say it has to be a full 49 days. Right. And Shmini Atzeret is a big one, right? Because if you pray Shmini Atzeret early out of it, and you come home, it's still Sukkot. Yeah. But you're now making kiddush for the Chag, and so I'm sitting in the sukkah and it's really daytime, so I should say l'shev b'sukkah because I'm eating a meal. But if you're making kiddush for Chag Shmini Atzeres, what am I supposed to do? Right? So the Marshal says to you, you can't do it. You can't make an early Shmini Atzeret. Taz argues. Many Ashkenazim don't agree with the Taz. They say don't do it. So for many reasons, the only time Ashkenazim don't have a problem with making it early Yom Tov is the seventh night of Pesach. There they are okay with making an early, bringing in Pesach early because there's nothing that really makes a concern over there for them, except for the prayer part. But Sfaradim, we are much more makel in all this when it comes to Shavuot. We say you can pray beforehand. We can pray beforehand, and as long as you come home, and then you make the kiddush after it's Seder. You can make kiddush before it's Seder, even on Shavuot, and just make sure you eat something like a kibetza of bread once Seder comes in. That's what's brought down in the Alkut Yosef. But these ideas apply all year long when making an early Shabbat or making an early Yom Tov. So from this section, yes, Malkiel.
So according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's not a must. You don't have to eat bread after Tzedek Kokamim. So if I started Shabbat early, according to Shulchan Aruch, we don't have to be stringent and eat another kazayit of bread.
So I don't believe the Shulchan Aruch addresses it straight on, right? The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say you have to eat bread again. So the question is, how do we view that day, right? How do we view it? And that was the machloket of two Tosefot. And the Rechon Wasserman says who says what's going on over there, and the Magen Avraham who says we have Rishonim who say it is considered day, and you have Rishonim who says it's not considered day. And in order to be machmer, to be yotze old poskim, once it hits nightfall, a person should eat some more bread to be yotze eating on actual Shabbat.
Because one of his shiurim, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, said that it seems from the Shulchan Aruch that one is not required to eat another kazayit of bread after Tzedek Kokamim, and one is permitted to finish his meal while it is still day, from after Plaga Mincha. So correct.
The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say you have to eat after nightfall. But according to the poskim, and here in the Yalkut Yosef it says it's recommended that he eat a kibetza of bread after dusk. And no one's saying it's a chiyuv, but it's a recommended practice. In order to be yotze all the poskim that some hold that you have to really wait till Shabbat. Okay, because there's a pasuk. Take a look in source page 152, source 17. It says achaluhu hayom ki Shabbat hayom laHashem. So you have to eat it on Shabbat. So that's the question. That's where it comes from. All right. So that's dealing with number one. Now we're going to deal with another issue. How much time do you have to actually add on? How much time do you have to actually add on? So we'll start. Source number 18. There's a Tosefot, and it says over there that Rabbi Akiva, what?
Mashu.
That right, Mashu, just a small amount. A minute, 2 minutes. Adding on is a minute or two. Right? It comes Erev Yom Kippur. You don't want to start adding on an hour beforehand. You want to be able to eat closer. And a few minutes beforehand. So every time it's just a few minutes. Here in the box, that orange box, he says over here that...
How they knew on those days without the clock to have a mushroom?
They were much smarter. Although a non-specific amount of time is given, Rav Tzvi Frommer and Rav Moshe Feinstein suggest that it should be 2 minutes. Others, such as Rav Brunstein, hold that should be 4 minutes. What's interesting to note is the Haye Adam, and there are many others who say it should be a full half hour. That you should accept Shabbat a full half hour before Shabbat. And that's the Mashu, right? That's the Mashu, is a full... It's a full half hour.
Now, in the winter, it's almost impossible because we have to pray mincha and then
correct. And that's where Moshe Feinstein's whole idea. He says because people want to say, oh, in the summer people add on to Shabbat, they make an early Shabbat because they love Shabbat so much. But Moshe Feinstein says, yeah, right. He says they love Shabbat so much they would add on a half hour to the winter Shabbat, and they don't do it. The reason why they're doing it in the summer is because of convenience. No one wants to eat dinner at 9:30, right? And he makes nafkaminas and halacha because of that, right? He says it's because it's convenience, not because someone really wants to love Shabbat. But by the way, what we do with the 18 minutes before Shkia is actually trying to fulfill this chayod. Okay, it's because 18 minutes before Shkia. How long is Benish Mashot? 13 and a half minutes, right? So it turns out to be how much time? About a half hour, right? Because if Shabbat really comes in at Shkia, but you're going to see there, it's like Yosef says you can actually do Tosefet Shabbat during Benish Mashot. I don't know how that works, but he says you can do that. And so there comes out the Benish Mashot, you can still do Tosefet. So you actually have a half hour's worth of Tosefet Shabbat according to that Shita. Okay, so we'll get through it step by step. Well, let's take a moment.
I thought the whole thing is just because
it's not. It's a biblical mitzvah. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to add on. Now, it's also because of lahachik adam min aveira. Here in the Reb Leibowitz in his Sefer Halachically Speaking, says why are we adding on anyway?
We don't want people to
right. So he writes that Hashem is exact, and Hashem knows what time is what, but we're not so exact. Therefore, we have mitzvah d'oraisa to add on. Right, that's what he wants to say here in the Halachically Speaking.
On the calendar, the candle lighting.
Yeah.
What is that?
That is 18 minutes before Shkia.
Okay, if my wife, let's say it's 4 o'clock, and my wife, this is the adding?
Yeah, that's part of the adding.
So
but we're going to see it's not really just adding. There's going to be a Shita, the Yereim Shita, the Rebbeinu Tam student, the Yereim held that Benish Mashot is actually before Shkia. Like we usually say that Benish Mashot is after Shkia, between Set. The Yereim held the Benish Mashot is before Shkia. And it's 3/4 of a mil. And a mil is 24 minutes, according to the biggest explanation. And so it turns out the 3/4 is like 18 minutes. Right? So that's also part of why we do 18 minutes on the calendar. For the Shitas of the Yereim, the Benish Mashot is 18 minutes before Shkia. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's take it one step at a time.
Candle lighting is 4 o'clock, and my wife likes 4:01. Is that a problem?
No, it's not a problem.
So you have extra time after whatever.
Until Shkia. We do malacha. We could do malacha up until Shkia, but we should try to stop malacha already at candle lighting time in order to be adding on to Shabbat the way that we're supposed to. Yes.
But it never counts on the 18 minutes.
100%. You should not count on those 18 minutes. In fact, you should light even earlier to add on more time to Shabbat. Right. Don't say I have those 18 minutes.
Even though you put the candle,
okay. Right. We don't accept it right away if you're lighting around time. Correct. Okay. Let's take a look in the Menuchat Ahava. This is Rav Moshe Levi, a big student in Yeshiva Kisei Rahamim, Rav Meir Mazuz. Fortunately, he passed away very young. He was, take a look at a little biography sketch of him. What was he, 39 years old? He wrote a lot of halachic svarim. And he writes over here as follows. Sarich lahosef mechol HaKodesh, v'lifrosh ma'asiyot malacha be'er Shabbos kodim zman beinish mashot. D'hainu kodim shkias hacham. Oh, you see right here? You have to, before twilight, before sunset. This is the Yereim Shita. That Benish Mashot is before Shkia. The minute pashat ata b'chol kilot Yisrael. The ain shir min Torah is Sefer Shabbat. There's no actual amount. Rak sheyifrosh malacha bezman shuvada yom. V'yesh amrim sheyesh shir min Torah Sefer Shabbat. V'shitzarich lifrosh malacha me'at kachamesh ad eser dakot l'fnei shkiat hachama. And he says, "V'roi lifrosh malacha." It's better to stop 20 minutes before Shkia. And that's the minhag in Eretz Yisrael. That's usually in most places in Eretz Yisrael is 20 minutes. The candle lighting on the calendar is 20 minutes before Shkia. Meaning and this is most of the cities in Eretz Yisrael. They do the 20 minutes. What? Okay, so now we're gonna do it. Now we're gonna do it. Look at the next piece, the Piskei Teshuvot. The Piskei Teshuvot. He says that he brings the Shitas of the Yereim. So the Yereim is the student of the Rabbeinu Tam. And he said, Shebenosh Mashot, right? Twilight, when we don't know if it's day or night, we really understand it usually that after Shkia is Benish Mashot, and then comes Tzed. Well, the Yereim said no. The Benish Mashot is before Shkia. Okay? And he said that Shebenish Mashot Matchil Gimel Revi'im Me'il. It's 3/4 of a mil. Now, how do you get to the 18 minutes? It's like this. According to the Yereim, Benish Mashot is before Shkia. Now, it's 3/4 of a mil. A mil is, according to the longest shita of how long it takes to walk a mil, is 24 minutes. Okay? Take 3/4 of 24 minutes, it's 18 minutes. And that's how we get our American calendars, in New York at least, that says candle lighting is 18 minutes beforehand. It's the shitas of the Yereim that it's 18 minutes, 3/4 of a mil before Shkia starts Benish Mashot. And that's when you have to already stop. And that's when you do Tosefet Shabbat from there. And therefore they refrain from labor at least 20 minutes before sunset, says the Piskei Teshuvot. 30 dakot kodem Mashkia, Ashrei lo. Even better if you can do 30 minutes beforehand. Right? I know a lot of Ashkenazim in Yerushalayim, they have the calendars of 40 minutes before Shkia, they're already lighting that. The Kamavaja had an issue with that 40 minutes because he said it might be a little bit too early. It might be before Plag and Yerushalayim.
The sound, the
sirens.
The siren. It's 40 minutes.
40 minutes, yeah.
I think so.
Right. So I saw in the Alka Josie he brought down that might be an issue. Might be an issue with that. He says it's 20 minutes. I saw him bring down that he said that it's 20 minutes. And you shouldn't do it 40 minutes. Yerushalayim, it should be 20 minutes beforehand. And this is where it all comes from. You look at that box, right after the Piskei Teshuvot on page 154. In most communities in the diaspora as well, women light candles 18 minutes before Shabbat. Some state in Eretz Yisrael accept Shabbat earlier than that. For example, it's well known the widespread custom in Jerusalem is for women to light candles such about 40 minutes before sunset. And in Shabbat is accepted 30 minutes before sunset. So there's definitely a mitzvah of Tosefet Shabbat. Exactly how much? We saw it's a mashahu. What exactly is a mashahu? Chai Adam wants you to do a half hour. We saw in Yerushalayim the Ashkenazim will do 40 minutes. We see by the Sfaradim usually it's 20 minutes before Shkia. And that's how much time a person should add unto Shabbat. What is the earliest time that you can accept Shabbat? It's from Plag HaMincha. Okay, and the Ramah says, he can do this. Okay, that once it's from Plag HaMincha. The only issue of Plag HaMincha is how you calculate Plag HaMincha. Okay, so usually we're taught that Plag HaMincha is an hour and a quarter before Shkia, right? And Shkia, that's the way we usually understand it. But there are many, and this includes the Chamavaji and Ritzak Yosef, is that Plag HaMincha is an hour and a quarter before Tzet. So that makes everything later now. Okay, because the whole question is how you calculate the Zmanim. Is it from Nates to Shkia, or is it from Alot to Tzet? Right? So that's how everything plays out. And the Lashanas are a little different. And here I'll look at the laws of Shabbat of Yonatan Nakson, and he writes in halacha number 11 over here. One may accept Shabbat as early as Plag HaMincha, which according to some opinions is 1 1/4 halachic hours before Shkia. And some people calculate this from Tzet HaKochavim. Okay? Chazon Avadia, Shabbat Volume 1, page 181. So Plag HaMincha is a little bit different. If you're counting it the way the Chamavaja says to count it. So I remember praying here in the Young Israel, Plag HaMincha Shabbat, and one of the Sfaradim who prayed there says, which Plag HaMincha are you going with? Right? Because It might be not plug.
If you are in Ashkenazi,
Right, so they'll go from Shkia. Okay, but there is that idea out there. If you take a look, there's a nice calendar you can get on your an app that you can get on your phone as Zmanei Yosef. As Zmanei Yosef, they try to put all the shitot of Chacham Ovadia for the Zmanim, and they tell you the timings based on that, on the shita and the rulings of Chacham Ovadia. So, for example, here it says today, Plag Mincha is 3:42. Times it say over here, Plag Mincha is. We don't have, so we go to my Zmanim on the other app. You have to have multiple apps on your phone. Put the Zmanim, whichever one is the earliest, whatever works better for you, right? Right. So you see on this one, 3:32, it says, or 3:31. So it's about a 10-minute difference. Now in the winter Zman, it's about a 10-minute difference. In the summer Zman, it might be even bigger because the time is big. Okay, so you have to pay attention to that as well. All right. And that's why when you do make early Shabbat, the shuls that do early Shabbat should, if they're coming into the Plag Mincha issue that it's a little bit too early, they should put out on the calendar, don't light candles before this time. So they know what time is actual Plag Mincha. Because if the husband's going to shul, and many Ashkenazim, the way they do this is that they pray Mincha before Plag Mincha, and then they pray out of it after Plag Mincha, right? Not to make two contradictions, two shitot on one day. So they'll pray before Plag and then after Plag. So they go to shul. The woman thinks my husband went to shul. I can light candles, and she's lighting candles before Plag Mincha. All right, can't do that. So you have to let her know what time Plag Mincha is, what time she should be lighting. And we'll see that those who say she should be lighting when the husband starts saying Mizmor Sher L'Yom HaShabbat in shul, usually about a half hour after you start Mincha. 20 minutes, 30 minutes after you start Mincha is that time, because Mizmor Sher L'Yom HaShabbat was the Baruch Hu of the old. Is now we accept Shabbat during Mizmor Sher. Arizal says you accept Shabbat at Boi Kala, right? That's the point of accepting Shabbat. Perhaps it's both points, but that's the idea over there. Okay, page 156. How do you do Tosefet Shabbat? Meaning, we talked about accepting Shabbat early. What needs to be done in order to accept Shabbat early? Is it enough just to think about it? Is it enough just to stop working? Do I have to actually say something? Do I have to daven something? Do I have to make kiddush? So let's take a look. Source 24 on page 156. Says the Ritvam, the Tosefet, adding on, it's not through words. Ubitu melacha, and not from stopping melacha. Bilvat, alone. Ela, sheyusifu b'dvarim shel kiddusha, o b'tfilah, o b'kiddush. You got to do something kadosh. You got to do tefillah. You got to do kiddush. That's how you make Tosefet Shabbat, says the Ritva. However, the Tosefet doesn't say like this, and he says that as long as one person stops doing something, stops doing melacha, it seems to be that Tosefet Shabbat comes in automatically, right? You take a Tzvi Pesach Frank in the Mikra Kodesh, and he writes that according to them, Tosefet, one must say that the sanctity of Tosefet takes effect on its own, and one is automatically prohibited to perform melacha. Take a look at the Ramah. Okay, if one accepts Shabbat earlier than the last few minutes, how does one do so practically? Okay, so a person wants to accept Shabbat earlier, not the last few minutes before Shabbat. He's not just stopping the last few minutes in the Malacha. He wants to take it in a Plag Mincha. What does he have to do? He says over here, the Ramah, Kibbul b'lev, lo havikvah. Taking it just in your heart is not considered adding on to the day. You have to do something more.
Action.
However, the Mishnah Berurah brings from the Bach and the Gra that mental acceptance is enough. The Gra and the Bach say just mental acceptance of Tosefet Shabbat is enough. Right? That's what the Mishnah Berurah brings down from the Bach and the Gra. You don't have to say it. So take a look at Shemir Shabbat Kilchata. He writes, although mental acceptance is okay, however, a person should try to verbalize it as well. Okay, it's done verbally by saying that he accepts Shabbat upon himself. However, even if he did not, even if he did not do it verbally, he just said it in his heart. That's also enough. But yeah, right. Exception. Okay. Or if you're davening early enough that it's not close to Shabbat yet, when you say Boy B'Shalom in Boy B'Shalom in L'Chadodi, or say Mizmor Shir, that could be your actual acceptance of Tosefet Shabbat if you're praying at an early minyan. Okay. Take a look at the laws of Shabbat, Halacha 12. He writes over here. Rabbi Nachson writes, merely refraining from malacha suffices to accomplish the mitzvah of Tosefet Shabbat. Halacha, you just stop doing malacha, that's considered Tosefet Shabbat, but it is better for one to enunciate his acceptance and not just mentally declare it. Person should say it. That's preferable. Again, it's not chiyuv to do it, but it's preferable that a person says it. As long as the person stops doing malacha, that would already be his Tosefet Shabbat. Okay. Now there's one more interesting idea when it comes to Tosefet Shabbat. The Aruch HaShulchan brings the Beit Yosef at source number 31 that says if a person came to shul, he didn't pray mincha yet, okay, and they're praying Arvit, they're saying Baruch Hu, Arvit Shel Shabbat, and he says Baruch Hu. They say Baruch Hu, and he answers Baruch Hashem, right? He answers back. What happens? He can no longer pray mincha. He no longer pray mincha. Why? Because he accepted Shabbat. Take a look. After answering Baruch Hu, even though there's still daytime, women no longer make an Erev Chatzerot. He cannot even make Erev Chatzerot, which is only the Rabbanan. He cannot insulate his food as he already accepted Shabbat. Yeah. And even if it's a Mizmor Shel Yom Shabbat, it's like Baruch Hu. According to this, for those of us who recite L'Chadodi, that constitutes accepting Shabbat. However, there's another problem because the Beit Yosef writes, if someone accepted Shabbat early, he could still make Erev Chatzerot. So how could you? So the Beit Yosef says two things: you accept Shabbat early, you can't make Erev Chatzerot. You accept Shabbat early, you can still make Erev Chatzerot. You can make an Erev. So which one is it? Can you do rabbinic prohibitions or not at that time? So says Aruch HaShulchan, there's a difference of when you accept the Shabbat or where you accept the Shabbat. If you accept the Shabbat by yourself, without a minyan, you're not in the shul accepting Shabbat. You just said, I'm accepting Shabbat at home. And now you realize that the food is not warm yet, right? So you can go ahead and put the food to warm, right? You can warm it up. The way that it would be permissible is only the Rabbanan. If it was only the Rabbanan. And you can still make an Erev Chatzerot because you did it by yourself, the acceptance of Shabbat. But if you accepted Shabbat with the minyan, then you're done for. Then you can't do anything. Take a look at the Yalkut Yosef outside of the Tzurba for a moment on page 191. Once someone accepts the sanctity of Shabbat upon himself, together with the shul, it becomes forbidden for him to perform any act forbidden on Shabbat, even if those acts are only D'Rabbanan. If someone accepts the sanctity of Shabbat upon himself on his own, not with the shul, then he may still perform acts that are forbidden by our sages to do on Shabbat, if it's necessary for the sake of mitzvah. For example, he may still instruct a non-Jew to turn on lights. Likewise, if someone was preoccupied on Friday and forgot to separate maserot for the produce he wishes to eat on Shabbat, he may still separate them at this time. So it makes a difference of when you did Tosefet Shabbat, where you did Tosefet Shabbat. You did it in a shul, you did it in the minyan, or you did it by yourself as a yofid. Now that we have this idea, says the Shulchan Aruch and source 32, Imrov HaKahal Kiblu Aleim Shabbat, if the majority of the congregation accepted Shabbat, HaMi'ut Nimshachim Acharehem Bal Korham. If the majority of the congregation accepted Shabbat, then the mi'ut, the minority who didn't accept Shabbat, is forced to accept Shabbat as well. That means that
if there's only one
very
million,
good. So says the Menuchat Ahava, says Rav Moshe Levi in the Menuchat Ahava, he says this is if only there's 1 minyan. But if there are multiple minyanim in the shul, in the city, so you can just say I'm going to a different minyan. So that's where the nafkamina goes. Bungalow colonies and or hotels. right? If you go to a hotel program and there's 1 million, right? Now today, the hotels even have multiple million. But if you went to a program that had 1 million, or you're in a bungalow colony and there's only 1 million, or you're in one of those out of town communities that really only have 1 million, right? And they accept Shabbat early, you also have to accept Shabbat early because there's only 1 minyan.
Right.
So us here, we in New York, we have multiple shuls. Everyone has different zmanim. So you can what's it called? You can accept Shabbat at different times based on, as long as it's really not Shabbat yet.
You could have the marriage, but if you are in the shul.
So here in the laws of Shabbat, Rabbi Nachson sums this up very nicely, and he says over here as follows: if most of the people in the city that one is residing in for Shabbat have already accepted Shabbat, then one must accept Shabbat along with them. Even if one does not want to accept Shabbat yet, even if one is not currently in the shul, right? However, there's more than one synagogue in the city, and one of them, even if it's a small shul, small shtibul, and they yet didn't accept Shabbat, he also doesn't have to accept Shabbat. So this might actually play out a little bit differently during the summer's month. There are certain out-of-town communities that don't have a late minyan. They only have early minyan. So if everybody's accepting Shabbat at an early point, you're going to have to accept Shabbat also at an early point, because every shul is praying at an early zman. Even if there's only one synagogue in the city, says Rav Nachson, but most of the Jews in the city don't go to shul Friday nights. Not that they're not religious; they're religious. They just don't go to shul Friday night. Too far, it's too dangerous. They don't go. So then, says Rav Nachson, one does not have to accept Shabbat with the minyan, because the majority of the Jews are not in shul. Majority of the Jews are not in shul. He makes that exception. Even if one prays regularly in a specific shul, and he's even a member, he pays his member dues, he does not have to accept Shabbat at that time, that the synagogue does, provided there are other shuls in the city that will be accepting Shabbat at a later time. Right? Today, everyone walks into every shul. It's a given. You can go anywhere. In a situation where one must accept Shabbat along with the congregation, everybody's accepting Shabbat at 7 o'clock. There's no minyanim afterward, and most people are going to shul. And you have to accept Shabbat also at that time. One may still pray mincha, even though one may no longer perform melacha. We'll deal with this coming up. That you can still pray mincha even though you were forced to accept Shabbat. All right, so that's on this dinim of accepting Shabbat with the tzibur, which might play out. But in New York, we don't really have that problem because we have all those different shuls accepting, taking the prayers at different times. To a degree, yes. Shulchan Aruch says a person should wait to pray out of it in order to add on from Chol HaKodesh.
That 2 minutes after Rabbeinu Tam, because Rabbeinu Tam is going to the...
Yeah, it has to be a mashahu, a minute, whatever it is afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Now, I accept the Shabbat early. And now, can I ask another Jew who has not yet accepted Shabbat to do malacha for me? Is it someone like Amir Lanochri? I can't do it, so I can't tell the guy? Or can I? Or maybe it's not the same thing. So says the Rashba, we learned that a Jew has accepted Shabbat. The Yisrael shekibu alav Shabbat koim shechashecha mutar. Leimer Yisrael chaver la'asos l'malacha plonin. Hovel he na'asas beheter la'osota. Because the other Jew, right? So if Reuben accepted Shabbat early, Shimon did not. So for Shimon, it's 100% mutar to do malacha at this time. So there's no iser. So says the Shulchan Aruch. Yishar mishamish kabel alav Shabbos koim shechashecha mutar leimer Yisrael chaver la'asos l'malacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the kibbutz shel chaver mutar ein iser emira shaykh bezeh. There's no iser of saying anything at this time.
We all are going the same thing.
No.
Well, we go
Because he's doing a malacha for you. This Jew is doing a malacha beheter.
Yeah.
You're getting a malacha done.
The guy also does have a malacha beheter.
What's the iser of Amir Lanochri?
What?
Why can't you speak the Milah?
No, I'm asking why.
I'm asking
why
you.
it's not the same thing.
It's because it's not.
Whatever not allowed to do, that's not good to do.
Because you can't get that done on Shabbat because you can't do it. So you can't call someone else to do it.
If you make a beheter
Right.
Shabbat,
So
you are not allowed to do anything.
Because of
you
what?
ask
Because of Shabbat.
Yeah.
It's my Shabbat. But that guy didn't start Shabbat yet. So him doing is completely mutter. It's a heter, right? The kibbutz shel chaver mutter ain't iser mir shaykh bezeh. right? Says that's the Mishnah Berurah, says the Rashba. Says the Rashba.
You understand the difference.
I understand what you're saying too, but it's not the way it works.
I understand, but
It's not the way it
what
works.
is the difference? That's what I want to know.
The goy is extension.
Why is the guy doing that melacha? He's doing it for you. You're getting it done.
This Jew
Here the Jew is not being Michal Shabbat.
He's not doing it for me.
No, him is completely mutter. It's
I
not
asked him
Shabbat
to
for
do
him.
something for me.
Yeah, but when he's doing it, how is he doing it?
Better.
The guy doesn't have Shabbat. Forget the guy right now. The Jew has Shabbat. Ken?
No.
Is this other Jew have Shabbat right now?
No.
No. Can he do malacha? Yes. So me telling him is not causing someone to do something on Shabbat.
No.
Be'isr.
The guy is even further. He
No.
doesn't have any
No.
Shabbat.
The guy is doing it on Shabbat. The Jew is not doing it on Shabbat. That's the whole point. Okay. Look at the nafkamina this way. The guy is doing it on Shabbat. The Jew who's doing it is not doing it on Shabbat. That's what they're saying. Okay. Says the Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchatam. He says what? That a woman will accept Shabbat by lighting candles, and an individual accepts Shabbat in the tefillah are permitted to tell another Jew who has not yet Shabbat to perform any malacha for them, even if it's not yet Benish Masha, even if it is not yet twilight. This is true even for biblical prohibition. You're not even telling them Doraita malacha to do. Even more, a congregation that has accepted Shabbat early and recited out of it while it's daylight may ask a Jew who prays in the next minyan, who did not yet accept Shabbat, to perform any type of melacha. So that's the dinam. That person, as long as the other Jew has not yet taken in Shabbat, you can do anything for them. They can ask you to do anything for them. Okay, this does play a little differently on Motzei Shabbat. On Motzei Shabbat, there's a machloket about whether you could, if you already took out Shabbat and the other guy didn't, and the guy who didn't take out Shabbat is asking you to do for malacha for him. If I remember correctly, there are those opinions. I believe it's the Ramah that says that you could. And you could ask a Jew who's already took out Shabbat to do malacha for you, but I believe it's the Levush that says you can't do it. And he brings many reasons we're not going to get into that today, but the Motzei Shabbat might be different than Erev Shabbat. Okay? Rabbi Nachson, page 105 over here, he writes as follows. Halacha 16, one who's accepted Shabbat early may ask somebody else who has not yet accepted Shabbat to do a malacha for him. And to see how far this goes, he writes, even if a woman of the house is already lit candles and accepted Shabbat upon herself, the rest of the household does not have to accept Shabbat along with her. Similarly, if the father of the family has accepted Shabbat early, the rest of the house does not have to accept Shabbat along with him. That's how far it goes. It's a one-man acceptance of Shabbat. The one woman's acceptance of Shabbat doesn't cause the whole family to accept Shabbat because they took Shabbat
If
early.
it's not the time of the Shabbat.
If it's taken Shabbat early,
Right.
correct. Okay, now, page 163. Mincha, praying mincha. So the Shulchan Aruch says, the person accepted Shabbat, he can no longer pray mincha. Why? Because if you already made it Shabbat, how could you go back and pray a prayer of the weekday? So what does a person do if he came into shul and they say Baruch Hu, they say Mizmor Shel Shabbat, he said it with them, but he didn't pray mincha now. So what does he do? He has to pray Arvit twice. He can't pray mincha. That's the only thing he can do. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. The only thing he can do is pray out of it twice. So now the question is, does that mean when I accept Shabbat early? Right, this goes back to the original question. When you accept Shabbat early, what does that mean? That it's actually Shabbat, or I'm just not doing malacha anymore? Because that would make a big difference, right? Because if I accepted a personal Shabbat, can I still pray mincha afterwards? It's Shabbat. The Shulchan Aruch said once you accept Shabbat, you can no longer pray mincha. So if I took Tosefet Shabbat early, like in the winter, I want to do Tosefet Shabbat. I can't pray mincha beforehand. It's too late. It's not going to be time day.
Until you're going to be accepting Shabbat.
So stand this Shmirat Shabbat Gilchata. He says you want to accept Shabbat, and there's no minyan for mincha before you want to accept Shabbat. Stand this Shmirat Shabbat Gilchata in source 41. Better mutab shitpalel b'yichidut Vikabel at the Shabbat lefnei hashkia ma'asher levatel mitzvot tosefet Shabbat. Says the Shmiras Chazal, don't pray mincha and minyan. Pray mincha before, except Shabbat, and then go to shul for Arvit. Because you have to do Tosefet Shabbat, and you can't pray mincha after Tosefet Shabbat. However, Tzitz Eliezer says no. An individual accepting Shabbat could still pray mincha later, right? It's when you accept in the shul as a congregation that's when you can't pray mincha after. You accept Shabbat on your own, right? We saw the distinction already with our shulchan, right? He says, and then you could. Chacham Ovadia says, you know what you can do? In this Chazon Ovadia, he says, you know what you can do? You can do Tosefet Shabbat halfway. You can do Tosefet Shabbat just for Malacha, not for Mincha. I'm doing Tosefet Shabbat. I'm not going to do any more Malacha for Shabbat, but Mincha I'm still going to be able to pray. So it's halfway. That's source number 43. Penina Halacham wants to say that maybe if you only do a mental in your brain, you do a mental acceptance of Shabbat, then you can still pray Mincha after the acceptance. Because it wasn't a verbal. And then he says, even if it's verbal, people still pray Mincha afterwards. The reality is, people do Tosefet Shabbat and then pray Mincha afterwards. One last idea, and this was what we mentioned before, says the Yalkut Yosef in source 45. Take a look at source 45. But Tzibur Hamegia Be'erev Shabbat LeBeit HaKnesset La'achar Hashkia Mutar Lahem Yitpalel Mincha Im Chazat HaShliach Tzibur La'achar Hashkia V'Likabel, and somehow L'Kabel Shabbat B'toch Yud Gimel Dakot V'Chatzi Shela'achar Hashkia. That somehow there can be a Tosefet Shabbat during Ben Hashmashot. Because Ben Hashmashot is a day, is a night. So you know what? It's maybe day, maybe night. I'm going to accept Shabbat early during the Ben Hashmashot.
And the person makes a night for himself. I am Mekabel Shabbat only when I'm going to be in shul and do Kabbalat Shabbat.
And that means what?
No, so even for early, he goes to shul.
Yeah.
So it doesn't Mekabel Shabbat at home. For a woman, when she put their candles,
that's all good and dandy in the summer. When in the summer it's good because during Kabbalat Shabbat it's usually early, so it's Tosefet Shabbat. But in the winter, we're starting Mincha 4:10. It says people don't show up to 4:15. You're starting to pray Mincha. It's already almost Shkia. So when are you doing Tosefet Shabbat? So says the Yalkut Yosef, you can do Tosefet Shabbat in between Shkia and Tzed when it's Ben Hashmashot. Somehow over there, that's Tosefet Shabbat. Yes. Shabbat. So the earliest you can take on Shabbat is from Plaga Mincha. So let's say in the summer she's taking from Plaga Mincha to take Shabbat. No, she doesn't have to continue it because most people are not doing it as a neder. Most people are doing it. This says Rav Moshe Feinstein. People are doing it in the summer for convenience. So it's not. If she took it as a neder, then she'll have to do Atarat Nedarim. Yeah, if she took it as a neder, she'll have to do Atarat Nedarim. But most people don't. Most people are doing it out of convenience in the summer. Page 104 in the Laws of Shabbat, Sefer Hayol Amim Rabbi Nachson, he writes over here, Halacha 13, if one is running late and he does not have enough time to pray Mincha before Shkia, he may non-verbally accept upon himself Tosefet Shabbat. It's like the Pinini Halacha. Refrain from Halacha and recite Mincha. So you can do that if you just do it mentally. This still accomplishes the mitzvah of Tosefet Shabbat. However, after one recites Mincha, he should preferably verbally accept Shabbat. In fact, there's an opinion, they didn't bring it here, but there's an opinion that says that you can accept Shabbat in between the quiet Mincha and the repetition, right? So usually you finish the quiet before Shkia, so at that point you accept Shabbat, and then you can do Chazar Zashatz after you accept Shabbat. That's another opinion you can do. Then he brings down the Chazon Ovadia that says one acceptance of Shabbat can be just for Malacha and not for Tefillah. So that's how it works out with that. Okay.
Shaliach Tzibur can also do it at Mincha, or he has to wait till he finishes Chazara?
Say it again.
The Shaliach Tzibur, if he's Chazan, so does he have to wait now until he repeats there, or he could do it after he's done as
Probably he can do it. According to that opinion, he can probably also do it himself. Also. Yeah. It seems to be that after he prayed Mincha, he's it's a good question. I don't want to say maybe not. Maybe he has the same. I'm not sure. It's a good question. The easiest way is to do what Chazan Ovadia said, is to accept Shabbat for Malacha, but not for Tefillah. Okay, and this way you accepted it partially just for Malacha, not to do Malacha, and not for Tefillah. Or you can do what Yitzchak Yosef writes in the Yalkut Joseph, is accept Shabbat during Bein Hashmashot, and says Tosefet Shabbat during the Bein Hashmashot. Okay, now.
But according to Rabbi Ovadia, do you still have to verbalize after Mincha that you fully accept Shabbat, or it's good enough?
He doesn't say it. He doesn't say it. He says over here, you verbalize it, and you verbalize it that you're only doing it regarding Malacha and not for Tefillah. And source number 43, page 164. Right? In the English, even if he wants to accept Tosefet Shabbat verbally, he can stipulate that he's doing so only regarding Malacha and not in other respects. Okay, so that's what he can do. Okay, accepting Shabbat early. We took a look already. Take a look at the calendar over here. They give you a calendar, page 167. So this is for my Zmanim. It tells you when Plag HaMincha is, according to the Gra and the Baal Tanya, where we talked about the difference in the Plag HaMincha. Candle lighting is 8:07. Look at the top in Chicago, Illinois. Plag HaMincha 6:52. Candle lighting 8:02. Shkiat Hama 8:27. So you can just imagine what time Tzet is. Almost 9 o'clock. So the guy is finishing shul 7:30. He's coming home. Will he actually make his Suda will he go into that late? It depends if you have guests. And if you have good guests, your Suda can go 6 hours long. I've had experience there. If you have, if you don't have such great guests, your Suda is going to end up right away. Right? So it makes a difference. Take a look at London. Flag is 7:35. Candle lighting 9:04. Sunset. Shkia is only 9:19 in the summer. Right? Eretz Yisrael, Beit Shemesh is not that bad, right? Plag HaMincha 6:18, sunset is 7:49. So you see, in other parts in Europe and in America, the Zmanim for Tzeit can be very late in the summer. Okay. Now, all right, the next section is really an issue for Ashkenazim and not really an issue for Sfaradim. And the issue is, we already dealt with this a couple of years back in volume 15. Of when can you pray Mincha and when can you pray Arvit. So the Gemara in Brachot told us, we remember this, Malkiel, we learned this, that there's a machloket, the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you can pray Arvit once it's Plag HaMincha. This is the whole idea of Plag HaMincha comes in, that you can already start doing night things. It's from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eli says that night starts at Plag HaMincha. Right, it's a famous story with the Kleisner Rebbe. Kleisner Rebbe was in Eretz Yisrael, in the place where Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eli's kever is. And he was with his Hasidim, and he davened Mincha way after Plag, right? And because Hasidim davened all the way up until Tzedek Chavir Rabbeinu Tam. The next day, he was crying, and he told his Talmid, he told his Hasidim, I have to go back to the kever. So why have to go back to the kever? He says, I have to ask Mechil from Yehuda Bar Eli. We were right in front of his kever, and we davened Mincha way after Plag, which he held was already time for Avit. So he went and he davened and he asked Mechil from Yehuda Bar Eli. All right, that's a god, that's a tzaddik, right? But so Yehuda Bar Eli says Plag HaMincha, an hour and a quarter before Shkir, an hour and a quarter before Tzeit, depending on how you learn. It's already night. That's why you can do your night mitzvot at that time. But Chacham said no. Chacham said Mincha goes up until Shkia or Tzeit, the way we learned. We learned up to Tzeit. Okay, goes up until nightfall. So we learned in the Gemara that you can go either way. But we said it doesn't mean you can go both opinions. That means on one day, you can pick one opinion, and one day you can pick another opinion. There are even those Rishonim who say you can't do that. That you have to always choose one opinion, and maybe in a case of exception, you can choose another opinion. These are all Ashkenazim, what they say. For us, Faradim, already, the Beit Yosef said, first of all, Arvit is a Rishut, is the Rabbanan. The whole institution of Tefillah is the Rabbanan. Therefore, perhaps, this is Rabbeinu Tam, it's based on Rabbeinu Tam Shita, saying perhaps you don't have to be worried about times. And that's why most Sephardic minyanim today, which is interesting because in the past, Sephardim were more careful with Zmanim than Ashkenazim when it comes to Tefillah, for this part, Mincha and Arvit. But today, we're not so careful. Here it says in the Yalkut Yosef, listen to this. I'm reading outside the Tzurba for a moment. He says, V'yesh no hagim, and there are those who have Shelo hitpalel Arvit miv'od yom. They don't pray Arvit when it's still daytime. Biyom shitpalalu bo mincha achar plag mincha. If you prayed mincha after plag, so you're saying it's still daytime. So then you can't pray Arvit after plag. You have to wait until it is set, right? Until it's nightfall. Shelo la'asot tartei destiri. You don't want to make to be two opposite opinions. But Yom Echad. But he writes over here, V'gam bezeh kvar nahagu lahakel. The custom amongst Sfaradim is to be mekel. It's to be mekel. It's after plag, and you pray mincha after plag. Guess what? You can pray out of it after plag also. V'yesh lahem al shemasha yismuku. You have what to rely on. And today, during the week and during Shabbat, we always do this. Right? We don't even look what time is plag. We just know it's after plag. We'll pray mincha at 7 o'clock and during the summer, the whole summer. Right? Even though it's after plag. And then we pray Arvit right away afterwards because we are not concerned for this. And it doesn't seem that any really Sephardim are really concerned for this today. So for Ashkenazim, though, it's a whole big issue because they are concerned about this. That way, if you go to the White Shul, they have a plag Arvit. And they have right before, every day they have a plag Arvit, right after plag, but they have mincha right before plag. Or they'll pray mincha, like here in the Young Israel, they pray mincha before Shkia, and then Arvit after Shkia. And they want to make a separation in the time to show it's daytime, and now it's nighttime. Sfaradim don't do that. But now their question is, what about Shabbat? Even by Ashkenazim, on a Kam Shabbat, they are making early Shabbat. But they're always so careful. So how do they do this? How do they not be so careful on Shabbat? First of all, Shulchan Aruch writes on source 48.
Early mincha.
Right. Right. That's the Young Israel also does that. They try to make mincha before plag, and then they do Arvit after plag, even to keep it then. But you can go to many places in Brooklyn that don't do that. Right? And Shomer Shabbat has many early minyanim, and they are after plag. Mincha's after plag, and Arvit is before Shkia, and is after and still after plag. So how do they do this? So first of all, Shulchan Aruch source 48 said, "Oh wow, time." Okay, you pray Arvit early on Shabbat in regular days. Magen Avraham says, I don't know how you're doing this on Shabbat because how are you praying Arvit when it's still you just pray Mincha? So the Magen Avraham wants to give some ideas. First, he says, usually Arvit is compared to what? You have the leftover kavanot you have to burn at night. So Arvit is compared to then. But guess what? On Friday, you're not burning it Friday night. You're burning it before Shabbat. And Arvit is comparable to the burning of that. It's burned before Shabbat. You can pray Arvit before Shabbat, says the Magen Avraham. Furthermore, he says, there's an opinion that says, you know what? If you're accepting Shabbat, then you've changed the reality. It's no longer Friday. It's Shabbat already. If it's Shabbat, you can pray Arvit, right? Because it's already Friday night. It's already Shabbat night. It's because you've accepted it. We changed the reality. You already saw about that. You can eat your Suda during the day. So it's already the next day, they say. And then there are those who say, like we say, that listen, it's the Rabbanon, and it's Shabbat, and it's a day, and it's people are not. And there's another opinion is that people are not going to stay in the shul, and people don't want to wait. And of course, it's convenient. Who wants to eat dinner at 9:30 after 10? So you know what? We can do it. So even Ashkenazim, who are more careful during the week, not to pray Mincha Arvit in the same time frame, either before plag, after plag, or before Shkia, or before Tzek, they do these things. When it comes to Friday, they're not careful at it. I'll take questions at the end. Just want to, unless it's really pertaining to what we're speaking about. One last idea, and then after this, I'll take questions. Okay, we already saw about this. Must the wife accept Shabbat at the same time as her husband? So it is a machloket. The Igrot Moshe says she does not have to. The Shevet HaLevi of Wozner says she has to. The Chacham Ovadia says the wife does not have to follow the husband. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu says she does have to follow her husband. So it's a machloket. As far as Ashkenazi, if the woman has to follow the husband, if he accepts Shabbat early, we who hold Chacham Ovadia the women do not have to accept Shabbat at the same time we do. However, there are many, Rabelski brought this down. However, if the husband accepted Shabbat early and he went to shul and he prayed, before he goes home, he should check through the window if the candles were lit. Right? That's usually when the wife accepts Shabbat. If the wife didn't yet light candles, then he should go back to shul and learn some and then come back. Because you don't want to come into the house where the husband accepted Shabbat and the woman didn't, right? And it's going to be problematic. So check the candles before you walk in to see if it's there. Otherwise, go sit on the couch and learn something, or go back to the shul and learn something. But shouldn't be in the same house where two people have not accepted Shabbat. Ken, yes. All right, but that's one reality. But the other reality, woman doesn't have to accept Shabbat the time her husband accepts Shabbat. She should. She could. If she could, she should. If she could, she should. But that technically, la halacha, she does not have to accept Shabbat at the same time as her husband. One other idea that he brings down over here on page 174, and with this we'll round up the shir over here, is the idea that we're not allowed to eat a meal a half hour before the time you have to say Kriyat Shema. Okay? So even though you're allowed to pray Arvit early, there's still a din of Kriyat Shema after nightfall, right? Once it hits nightfall. And the halacha is a half hour beforehand, you're not allowed to eat. So let's say I prayed in the shul after Plag, right? By the time I get home, it's within a half hour before it sets. Can I start my Suda or not? Because halachically, you can't start a meal if you're a half hour before Shema. So he brings over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, most people are makel. People start their Suda, and there's good reason for it. First of all, if you appoint somebody to remind you, right? If you appoint someone to remind you, then that's okay, because you have someone reminding you so you can start your meal. And most people have a custom, especially in the summer, that right before Birkat HaMazon, they make sure to say Kriyat Shema, they make sure to say Sfirat HaOmer, if it's the Omer time, they make sure they say these things at some point during the Suda, someone reminds them, and that would be okay. And that's the way most people are noheg. However, there are other opinions that say you shouldn't start the Kiddush if it's within a half hour, but most people are makel. They start a Kiddush within a half hour of Shema, as long as someone is to remind them. Now, the truth is, this is not only on Shabbat. We Sephardim will almost always pray Arvit early. We always have to make sure we repeat Shema at Tzet. Which Tzet are we talking about? So here in the Yalkut Yosef, which you learned a couple of weeks ago, he says as follows. If you prayed Arvit after Plag, or even after our Shkia, you should wait until Rabbeinu Tam Tzet is, because that's the actual Tzet Shulchan Aruch says Tzet, is 72 minutes, right? And then say Kriyat Shema again. And there's those opinions, like Rabbeinu Yonah said, that you have to do L'chatchil, you have to repeat Shema at the time of Tzet, which means, according to Chamawaji, at Rabbeinu Tam's Tzet. So that means that we don't have Rabbeinu Tam's Tzet on there, but would be about 5:45 today would have been Rabbeinu Tam. Here, I'll take a look at the Zman Yosef. In the Zman Yosef, he writes over here that today Rabbeinu Tam, according to the Shitat of Chamawaji, would be 5:26. So at 5:26, when we pray Arvit early, we should have read Kriyat Shema again at 5:26. So a person should pay attention to that as well. Okay? So we'll end off our shir over here. Any questions? We have another minute. I'll take a question or two if we have.
Darvit usually, I heard by the stars, right?
Like what stars? You see stars? I'll knock you out. You'll see stars.
It gets darker.
We don't go by stars. We go by the zmanim that are put in the calendar. Because today, especially in New York City, our skies are polluted that you can't see anything. Okay, if you go out into the countryside, then possibly you can see. But we are not trained to understand what is 3 medium stars, what is 3 small stars, what is 3 large stars. We're not trained for that. Therefore, we have zmanim, calculated calendar times, and that's the times that we follow. Okay? זק ברוך הוא כולם, רבי חנינה מקשה אומר, צא הקדוש ברוך הוא, זקות ישראל. לפיכך יפת להם תור מצוות שנאמר, אדוני חפש למען צדקו יגדיל תורה מידיר.
Thank you.
Thank you.